Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Very grateful that you're here. For those who are guests or not with us regularly, I'm so grateful to everyone who's participating today. Moshe continues to be working on his and Regina's move, and so he is our most of the time Haftarah reader, but he hasn't been able to be here in a couple weeks, so we're still very much wishing Regina refuah shlema, and that as soon as Moshe is ready, we'll do a Chanukat Bayit, a dedication of their new home in South San Francisco. But until then, it's sort of me for all of these pieces. If anyone would like to learn to chant a Haftarah, even a piece of it, I will be delighted to teach you, or just to dial back to anybody's bar or bat mitzvahs. We're here and would love to share any or all of these things with you, but here we are. So just want to make sure that I have a couple of the pieces that I need very much. Okay. I am beyond indebted to, I have so many rabbis that I love, but Rabbi Mordecai Finley is probably the most impactful rabbi of my life, which is saying a lot because I have known many wonderful rabbis. He has made Aliyah and is living in Tel Aviv with his amazing wife, who is Israeli. All of his children are there. And though I miss him terribly, just being in Los Angeles, I'm incredibly grateful that he has gone home to Israel. He is the greatest champion of Jews and Judaism and Israel and its absolute right to exist and defend itself. He wants nothing more than peace. He is a Marine, a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and the most sensitive and mystical person maybe I've ever known. So a true alamalis, just an amazing man. And he is fascinated and has unbelievable compassion for certain minor characters in the Torah, ones that often get short shrift or even way worse from the traditional commentators. And he considers Esav to be the most compassionate and sympathetic character in the entire Bible. That what happens to Esau, we're not quite there yet, but is really so unspeakable in so many ways, and he has such compassion for Esau, as well as he does for Hagar. And I have long been fascinated with the character of Hagar, and so as we say in study circles, l'shem omro, in the name of the one who taught it, I would like to share with you Rabbi Finley's teaching on the amazing character of Hagar and the way that her story arc moves through 3 parshiot, 3 whole Torah portions. It's a lot. Pain, regret, hurt, and betrayal form so much of the backdrop of the book of Genesis. There are so many tragic moments, but many often produce visions of God and the appearance of angels. Sometimes moments of unimaginable fulfillment arise. Of the many sad, heart-wrenching, and ultimately beautiful stories in Genesis, one of the most distressing is that of Hagar. We see Hagar 3 times in the Torah, in Genesis 16, Genesis 22, and according to the Midrash, in this Torah portion, in Chayei Sarah, but under a pseudonym, under the name Keturah. We met Hagar as the maidservant of Sarai before she became Sarah, back in Genesis 16. When Sarai could not conceive, Hagar was given to Avram, before he became Abraham, as a concubine. Hagar conceived in the very next verse, but Sarai felt slighted. Sarai mistreated Hagar in a case of be careful what you wish for, and Hagar fled down Highway 61, as Rabbi Finley describes modern day, and found herself near a spring of water in the desert. An angel of God intervened and counseled Hagar to return to Sarai. The angel assured Hagar that her own offspring would increase beyond measure. The child of Avram, who she was carrying, would be named Ishmael, God hears, because God had heard her prayer. We are told that Hagar gives a name to the God who spoke to her through the angel. And she called the name of Adonai who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me, El Roi." For she said, even here I saw after I was seen. Therefore, that well was called Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the well of the living God who sees me. We are not told why Hagar must return to Avram and Sarai, but it seems that some part of the plan that the God of the Bible has in mind required that Hagar submit herself to Sarai. Hagar returned and bore Avram's son Ishmael at the end of Genesis 16. In Genesis 17, as we know, Avram was circumcised and the covenant was established. Avram's name becomes Abraham, Sarai's name becomes Sarah. In chapter 21, Abraham and Sarah have a son and name him Yitzchak, laughter. We meet Hagar again in Genesis 21, some years after she was saved by the angel in Genesis 16. By this time, Ishmael is a teenager. In chapter 21, as we know, Sarah saw something unseemly happening between Ishmael and his younger half-brother Isaac. Sarah insisted that Hagar and her son, Abraham's son, Ishmael, be banished to the desert. The offense that Ishmael committed will never be clear, other than it was a play on the name Yitzchak, laughter. In Genesis 21 last week, Hagar was devastated again. In Genesis 16, Hagar fled the mistreatment of Sarah, but she returned to the fold and submitted to Sarah. Here in chapter 21, she is banished with her son. Hagar stumbled through the desert near Beersheba and suffered a spiritual collapse. She ran out of water and resigned herself to the fact that she and her boy would die. But the angel intervenes again. God opened her eyes, and Hagar saw a well of water. She and her son were saved. The reader assumes she has returned to the very place, to the well, and to the angel of the first angelic intervention, Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the well of the living one who sees me. Twice forlorn and stranded, twice saved by the power of sight. But the rabbinic tradition insists that Hagar's story did not end there. In this week's Torah portion, after Hagar has died, Abraham marries a woman whose name is Keturah. It means incense. In the Midrash, from somewhere between 300 to 600 of the Common Era, in Genesis Rabbah, Rabbi Yehuda says, Keturah was Hagar. The brevity of this statement, Keturah, Zo Hagar, is directly disproportionate to its interpretive brilliance. In that brief utterance of Rabbi Yehuda, many things are brought to light. It seems that the Midrash, through Rabbi Yehuda, tells us that Abraham loved Hagar. The desperation of barrenness that caused Abraham and Hagar to be thrown together, however begrudgingly, produced a kind of forlorn intimacy. Perhaps their love was simply that of two people who quietly asserted their humanity in the midst of a vortex of pain and destiny. It was Sarah's barrenness that brought them together, and Sarah finally bearing Yitzchak that drove them apart. Now Sarah's death releases a force that took each of them by surprise. We really don't know, but we are invited by Rabbi Yehuda especially to imagine. Rabbi Yehuda's assertion is no way supported by the biblical narrative, but it helps shape a rabbinic theory of love and alternative lives. Rabbi Yehuda seems to conceive of a God who holds blessings in store that might have seemed to be sheer fantasy. Perhaps we would imagine that Hagar would have simply gone her way and Abraham would have married, as Rabbi Finley says, an incense woman of consolation, bringing some aromatherapy, perhaps, along with her, with the beautiful smelling incense to maybe calm Abraham's wounded psyche. But Rabbi Yehuda does not accept that. In saying Keturah is Hagar, Rabbi Judah insists that loose strands of the narrative urge themselves back on each other. Hagar's son Ishmael nearly died, but Ishmael was Abraham's son as well. Both of Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, nearly died at Abraham's own doing. Imagine the trauma in Abraham's heart. He would have had a hand in killing both of his sons, but both times he was stopped by angelic intervention. Rabbi Finley wonders, is such a man worth loving? Might we assume that Hagar or Keturah loved her stepson, Isaac, like a son, in spite of what Isaac's mother had done to her? Might we assume that Hagar, Keturah, herself was stricken when she heard that Abraham had taken Isaac up to the mountain to be killed as a sacrifice? She and her son almost died at the hand of Abraham. Isaac almost died at the hand of Abraham. Why doesn't Hagar hate him? But Rabbi Judah asks us to say some different questions. Did she forgive him? Did their love survive? We do not hear of Abraham weeping when his son and his concubine were cast from his life, apparently forever. But maybe that inconsolable heartache and guilt that we assume had led Abraham to take Isaac for a sacrifice. Rabbi Finley says it's one of his interpretations of the binding of Isaac that Abraham's anger at God and Sarah, that he acquiesced, produced an unbearable guilt and shame that caused him to imagine that God wanted him to kill Isaac. So many interpretations of the binding. But from Rabbi Yehuda's assertion, we can only infer why Hagar had to return to Sarah, so that the love between her and Abraham could be sealed, so that Ishmael and Isaac could form a friendship based on their wounded father, their wounded mothers, a friendship that was torn but not shredded and now could be sewn back together. Life rifts us apart, but Rabbi Judah wanted us, the readers of the Bible, to be able to sew those fragments back together. Sarah and Hagar's sons' lives were shaped by a certain amount of horror. We can only imagine their trauma. But in this parsha, they come back together. In Genesis 25, verse 9, after Abraham dies at a good, ripe age, old and contented and gathered to his kin, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of the Machpelah. We are told twice that Isaac comes from, has visited, and goes to live at the Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the well of the living God who sees me. Isaac was coming from there when he saw Rebekah, and after Abraham's death, he goes to live there. Verse 11, after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the very well that Hagar had named back in Genesis 16. Perhaps he wanted to go live with his half-brother and stepmother Hagar, Keturah. We have to assume that Isaac took his new wife Rebekah there. We might assume that Rebekah got to know Isaac's stepmother Hagar and his half-brother Ishmael, maybe very well. But the stories Rebekah heard from Isaac, Hagar, and Ishmael are recounted in the yet-to-be-written Midrash of Rebekah. Rabbi Finley hopes to write that during his retirement years. I've heard him give this teaching before, and he always ends it the same way. He says, I am in awe of the genius of Rabbi Yehuda. This, perhaps, was Hagar. To thread these narratives together into any kind of a unified tapestry is part of the genius of the Torah. This well of the living God who sees me was a vision given to Hagar. And she is, of course, the mother of Ishmael and all of the billions of descendants from that line. Ishmael is given so much honor in this parsha. We hear of his children. His death is recorded. He is given kavod. We have such a lack of kavod for each other in our world these days. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's necessary. But the Torah, Rabbi Yehuda, certainly my beloved Rabbi Finley, remind us to keep our hearts circumcised, open to the pain of the other, even when it seems inexplicable and when it's really, really hard to do. And I know, my friends, it is hard. Let's maintain our vigilance. Let's maintain our compassion for one another, and let us look to characters that we might brush over or want to forget or distance ourselves from in this Torah, because they have so very much to continue to teach us. Shabbat Shalom.